Hello, musicians and trumpet friends. This is a trumpet channel, but today's video is something that applies not only to other musicians, but to life in general. We're going to talk about what I call the practice formula. So I have this thing I call the practice formula. Uh, 4 parts. It's very easy to remember. Just remember these 4 words: isolate, simplify, repeat, and advance. So let's go into the details of what each of those are. First of all, we want to isolate the problem. And you know where we see this a lot with music is a lot of times people will say, oh, I didn't get that right. And they try again. And I've said many times that the train that could, a lot of people say, oh, I like that story, right? Um, that's a story about not quitting. That's not a good practice formula. Don't keep trying until you get it right. That's a horrible, horrible way to practice, okay? What we want to do is be more specific with what we spend our time doing. So, um, if you keep cracking notes, specific notes in a song or something, fix those notes. If you get the wrong key signature, fix that. We want to isolate, hone in on the problem. Don't waste your time by just arbitrarily trying again. Because there's a reason why you miss it, and the chances of you missing it a second, third, fourth, fifth time are very, very good. The chances are good that you keep missing. It's not it's not likely that just by trying harder you're going to get it again the second time. You're not going to get it right just because you tried harder. I hope that's sinking in. So yes, we want to isolate the problem, and in order to do that, you have to have a little bit of discernment, right? You have to be listening to what comes out of the bell. And here's the problem is sometimes you have more than one problem. You're not going to fix both problems at the same time. And that's especially true, I'm going to say it again because it's so important. It's especially true with the whole try harder approach. The more problems you have to fix, the more necessary it becomes to isolate each one of those problems individually so that you spend time fixing this problem. And when you get that problem fixed, you move on to this problem and so forth. Okay? So that's what we mean by isolate the problem. Don't just try the whole song again. Don't just try the whole exercise again. If you're doing a routine, don't just try again and try harder. That's not going to help. More of the same produces more of the same. All right? So step 2 is to simplify the problem, and we want to simplify it in a way that makes it easy to advance in increments, and we'll get to that in step 3. So for example, a lot of times when we have trouble with a song, for example, this practice formula, it does not only apply to songs, but that's the best way to talk about it. And that's why I'm created a formula, right? Because there's no practice technique that's one size fits all. Anyone who's going to be a great musician needs to have their thinking cap on, right? What worked for this problem over here may not work for this problem over here. So let's say you have a fingering problem, and in a concerto that you're working on or whatever. Almost always for a fingering problem, it's a matter of tempo, right? And that's one of the easiest ways. So you isolate the problem in terms of, uh, you know, where is the problem beginning? Where is the problem ending? So when I say isolate, let's back up to number one again. When we're talking about isolating the problem, we're not just talking about where is the problem in the song, okay? Um, what part of the exercise are we having problem with? We're also isolating the precise nature of the problem, right? Is it a fingering problem? Is it a chop problem? Is it an endurance problem? There's any number of things that it could be, right? We want to put our finger on what is the problem. That's the first step, right? Isolating is not just a geographical thing on the page. It's also a topical thing in terms of what issues are you having, okay? So when we simplify the problem, there are indeed a lot of things that can be simplified with slowing the tempo down, okay? I chose finger problem because that's a great example. Um, so when we're working on, we find that place in the song where we have problems with the fingering. Let's say the piece is supposed to be played at 144. If it's a serious problem, go all the way back to 72. I'm sorry. So let's do 76. Okay, 144. Yes. Anyway, we want to make it basically half the tempo. Try to play it at that tempo to get the right fingerings, right? If you can't play it correctly at that tempo, then it's time to change what gets the beat, what rhythmic value gets the beat. So for example, if quarter notes get the beat and you can't play it at half of the tempo, then you need to set it at half of the tempo where the eighth note gets the beat. And that might sound like overkill to you, but if you can't play the fingerings correctly at half the tempo, then we've diagnosed a very serious problem. And it justifies going to, when you go to the half the tempo at the eighth note gets the beat, we are now officially at 1/4 of the tempo. All right, what's that old saying? Drastic problems require drastic measures. And you know what? This comes down to an attitude thing, by the way. Um, you know, how serious are you about being a great player? Are you willing to be bored? Right? Are you willing to be humiliated? Because sometimes that's why people won't do it so slow, because they either they're bored or they've got so much musical pride that they can't believe that they need to take something that slow. And they just won't do that because it's so far beneath them, right? So you have to ask yourself, how much are you willing to invest in terms of that kind of mental stuff to be a better player, a better musician? If it's not worth it to you to do that, then you just need to accept the fact that you'll never be that great of a player. If you can't pay that price, as far as I know, if you have, like, for example, fingering issues that are that severe, and you're not willing to break it down to that level, to where it's almost humiliating, then you don't have what it takes to be a player. That sounds harsh, right? But that's the fortitude that we need to be good at what we do. So that's a sort of like a tough love kind of thing. People don't talk about tough love anymore, right? It's just wishy-washy. Um, I saw a rabbi talking about fish love. We love fish because it's so tasty, but that's not love for the fish, is it? Right? If I can find that video, I'll put a link to it. Um, But yeah, there is such a thing as tough love, where you get to hear the stuff that's not comfortable for you to hear. And I'm here to say, if you're not willing to simplify the problem to a degree where it's almost humiliating, then you don't have what it takes to be a great player. You don't have the fortitude for it. And that brings up some other questions that I won't explore with you. But you ask yourself, if that's a problem, then what's wrong in your life? But I'm not going there, okay? We're keeping this musical, but that is a symptom that something else is probably very wrong in the way you're living your life. But we won't go there. All right, so you simplify the problem. Let's talk about other forms of simplification. You know how I approach fixing a wrong key signature note? That's not necessarily a fingering problem. Fingering problem is when your fingers aren't used to moving in that pattern, right? A key signature problem is more up here. It's more you're not really thinking about the key signature at that time. You accidentally practiced it wrong a few times. Now you have to go back and fix that one note. Well, I have a system for practicing that where I work outwards from that note, right? So I'll do that note, start on that note, and then I'll do the note after it. That note, then the note after it. So let's say the note I'm trying to fix is a written A flat, and it goes to G. So I'm going to go A flat, G, right? And I'm just making this up. This is not a piece of music. I don't have any music up here. So the note I'm trying to fix is A flat. I've been playing it A natural on accident. Maybe there's a flat earlier in the measure, right? If there's an A flat earlier in the measure and I didn't see, I didn't apply that to the rest of the measure, and I accidentally practiced A natural instead. Now I have to fix that note. I'm playing the A flat correctly, and I go to the G. That's a simplification. Anyone can play those two notes, right? Anyone can play those two notes. So we're simplifying the problem by isolating so much geographically that makes it simple. And then we just expand out from there. Da, da, da. Okay, so now we're going C, A flat, G. Now we're gonna add another note after the G. Da 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 da, right? Da 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 da. Then we're gonna add a note before. Dee da da. My singing's not so good today. So you see how that is. We're working out. Now I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because that's the next step in the formula. But I wanted to show you that we could simplify by narrowing the number of notes. Another thing you could do to simplify, let's say it's a tonguing problem. Slur the notes. Simplify it by slurring the notes. And we'll talk about what to do with that in the next step. I kind of got ahead of myself on the last one. But, and here's why this formula is so important. The simplification has to be based on what exactly you figured out in step one, right? You isolated the problem. You figured out exactly what was the nature of the problem. Well, the simplification has to be based on what it is that you're having problems with. It has to be relevant to step one. All right. Range is another one. Range is another problem. And you simplify it. And it's obvious. How do you simplify a range thing? You take it down. Okay? So whatever the problem is, you want to eliminate the problem by simplifying it. That's step two. Step three now is to repeat it correctly. Let's emphasize that word, correctly. Repeat it correctly in its simplified form. So that example I gave you where we're going to fix that A flat, we're going to do this 10 times. And that might seem like overkill, right? Do you know what? Those people who say that, oh, Mr. Lewis, that's overkill, guess what? Proper practice is overkill. Get used to it. Proper practice is overkill. So I'm going to do this 10 times. And I always do singing and fingering afterwards. Da 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 da. Okay, how do I know I did 10 times? I count with my fingers. Let me show you that real quick. I squeeze my pinky for 1, I squeeze the next finger for 2, I squeeze the next finger for 3, squeeze this one for 4, squeeze the thumb for 5, then I go back to the pinky again, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's how I know how many I've done. I use that counting method on the gigs. That's how I count, okay? Now, so I just repeated 10 times A flat G. Then we add the C, and I'm not going to do a whole 10 times. Da, 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 right? We're going to do that 10 times. Overkill, right? That's what we want. We want overkill. Nobody, I've never had a student in all my years of teaching. I've been teaching since 1980. I've never had a student that can't do what I just showed you. In terms of ability. Now, there are some students that can't do it because of their fortitude. We talked about fortitude earlier. Some people can't sit still, or they're too ashamed, or whatever. Whatever reasons they have, they won't do it. But there's nobody I've ever worked with that can't do it. Okay? This overkill repeating 10 times. Now, that said, you know what? It would be dishonest for me to say that I always do 10 times always. Okay? What I teach is for the model that I lay out for you is based on what we would do if it was truly challenging. Sometimes you have to work on music that is not challenging. Then you still use the same approach. You still want to go through and fix some of the problems. You know, even though it's not challenging, you might have, like, there might be that one note. So you still use this method, but maybe instead of doing 10 times, you do 5 times. That's the nice thing about using an organized system like this, right? Is that you can be kind of mathematical about it. You can say, I'm going to do 5 times. That's exactly half as much effort. It's not a feel thing. I don't feel like I'm doing half as much. That is half as much, okay? Does that make sense? All right, so step 3 is repeating the problem in its isolated form, and ideally, if it's something that's really difficult, 10 times. And for trumpet players, I do recommend each time that you alternate it with singing and fingering. My singing is horrible today. I think it's because I went fishing in the morning and out in the sun, and I'm kind of all dried up. So I'm sure my voice sounds different too. So that leaves us to the fourth step. We want to advance in increments, metered increments, okay? So a great example of that is that fixing the A flat, right? The increment that we advanced in was one note at a time. We did the A flat to G, then we added a C before the A flat, then we did the F after the G. Oh, my horn's falling apart. No, I'm just kidding. And so yeah, in one note at a time, we're expanding out. In the case of a incorrect key signature note, or I said key signature note, I meant accidental, because we were talking about accidentals that carry through. So let's say you got a accidental that carried through and you fingered it wrong. Really, I think you should do this expansion thing for about 4 bars. 4 bars before, 4 bars after. And that will, if you're doing 10, think about that. You're doing, each time you add a note, you're doing 10 repetitions. Now, of course, you need to use your own judgment. If it's 4 bars of 30-second notes, that might be overkill beyond overkill, right? You have to use your better judgment. So yes, advancing in increments. Another example of advancing in increments. When you're at half tempo, what do you do after you've done 10 repetitions at this tempo? You move it, you move it 1 notch. Now this is an issue if you have a digital, like on your phone, or one of those digital ones that does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Traditional metronomes don't go from 76 to 77. If you take a look at a traditional metronome, we have from 72, it's 72, 76, 80, 84, 88. Those are increments of 4. So I think it's a huge waste of time on the digital ones to go from 76 to 77 to 78 to 79. That's one of the biggest reasons why I still use a real metronome. This is a Franz, and I really like it. I love this metronome. Anyway, and I'm not doing an ad. I don't think they make metronomes anymore, if I'm not mistaken. So we're doing advancing in increments until we get to the solution to the problem, right? If it's a tempo thing, we keep advancing until we get to the tempo that we're supposed to be performing at. Now, there are some people that would go beyond that. We're not talking about that today. That's something else, okay? I will talk about it eventually in one of the videos because it's in one of my books, one of the books that's not been published yet. But so we will eventually talk about that, but that's something else. That's not part of this formula, okay? Now, there's one more step because we want to advance in increments, but to make that work, we have to go back to repeating. Does that make sense? And I kind of already said that. I'm kind of jumping around on this, but I hope you are all getting the idea, right? We want to isolate the problem. We want to simplify the problem. We want to repeat the music correctly that's in its simplified form. Advance in one minute increment, 1 note, 1 metronome click, okay? If we're doing articulation, 1 tongue, right? Maybe tongue every 8th note, then tongue every 4th note, right? Then we want to repeat again in that next slightly less simplified form. Then we advance again and we repeat it again 10 times in that next slightly less simplified form. And we keep doing that until we get to our goal. Okay? And I want to stress one more time that you do this for each individual problem. And let's say hypothetically we're talking about a piece of music that you're working on. Let's say that piece of music has 8 problems associated with it. You want to apply this philosophy, this formula, whatever you want to call it, to each one of those problems individually. If you don't, you are what I call a sloppy player. Okay? If you don't do this, you are a sloppy player. We don't want to become sloppy players. We never want to make that sound like it's okay. All right? So that's what I've got for you on the practice formula. I wasn't going to do this today, but I sat down to do my metronome video as a request, and I realized I can't talk about the metronome if I haven't done the video on the practice formula yet. Okay? So that's why I did this now. We have to have the practice formula first for you to understand how I approach using the metronome. So I'm going to finish this video and get working on the metronome video, which I probably won't post at the same time. When I post videos too close to each other, one of them doesn't get any views. And I've made that mistake too many times. So this one will probably be a week before the metronome video. All right? Okay, well, God bless you guys. We'll see you on the next video. Thank you.